This is Saturn Girl. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, comment below because I want to know what you think. And it helps me out with the algorithm. Also, when you subscribe, please click the bell so that you get notified when my new videos drop. And my videos are the best. Well, anyway, today is a special edition of my transit videos. Yes, we have some big stuff going on. Now, for those of you who are watching me for the first time, we typically talk about a transit, what it means in general, and then what it means for you individually. So watch until the end. Well, so what's going on? This Friday, October the 28th, we're about to have a lunar eclipse. Let's look at the chart here. Today's the 25th when we're filming, and we're going to go ahead to Friday. Now look at this, the sun at 5 degrees Scorpio, opposite the moon at 5 degrees Taurus, right? So remember that eclipses are when the sun, moon, and earth align, from our perspective. Now, solar eclipses are when the new moon is within 15 degrees or so of the lunar nodes. Well, one of the lunar nodes. And a lunar eclipse is when a full moon is within 15 degrees of the lunar nodes, right? So with the new moon eclipse, right, that's solar because the moon would be in between the earth and the sun. And then for a lunar eclipse, it's a full moon, right, because the earth is between the sun and the moon. I hope that makes sense. For more information about eclipses, I do a whole detailed spiel in my solar eclipse video with your horoscopes. So check that out. Now, we think of full moons as endings or culminations. It's the time when we reap the rewards or consequences of the previous cycle. So lunar eclipses are like big endings, yes? Happy endings. I mean, not really, not always happy. I think of them as bringing a resolution to a bigger cycle. The nature of this cycle, we can glean from understanding where we are in the eclipse cycle. That's my own term for it. At least I think so anyway. We'll talk more about what this means for you in just a minute. But if that wasn't enough, at the same time, we've got Mars opposing Jupiter, right? So let's look on the chart once more. See, we've got the sun and the moon, and just 6 degrees away, 6 degrees of separation, right? You know, there's 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, right? So all of us are related to Kevin Bacon somehow by 6 degrees. So, I'm not going to do it right now, but just assume that it's true, that we're all related to Kevin Bacon through 6 degrees. Anyway, but you see here Mars at 11 degrees and Jupiter at 11 degrees, and Jupiter is retrograde, right? Well, what the hell does this mean? Yes? Well, what is Jupiter in astrology, right? Well, sorry, what does Mars mean in astrology? Remember that he's a malefic, or not a nice planet. And he can be a destructive influence. You see, he's our master of malice and mayhem, isn't he? He's violence, conflict, and competition. He's illnesses, plagues, and wars. But he's also valiant, courageous, and full of passion. Jupiter, on the other hand, is the most benefic planet, meaning he is nice, right? But he's not always nice. He can be a constructive influence, sometimes, right? Jupiter is our didactic daddy of dogma. I love alliteration. He's wisdom, philosophy, and spirituality. He's also luck, honor, and abundance. But he's also a fanatic, isn't he? Sometimes a religious one. He can be quite pompous and convinced he's right. I mean, who fits that bill? Anyway, a little self-criticism. He also blows things. Blows things up. He blows things up or makes them bigger, doesn't he? Remember also that oppositions are the most difficult aspect and represent long-term tensions coming to a climax. So what happens when we see these two in an opposition? Well, I have this in my natal chart, so just look at me, right? In natal charts, with this aspect, we see people who tend to think that they're always right, tend to be the moral police, or tell people what they should or should not think, or do, for that matter. We always give copious advice that we never follow because we're terrible hypocrites, right? We often have this military mentality, right? Things are very black or white, right or wrong, this or that. This is the right way. You know, I'm guilty of it too. And you probably know that. We can be zealots, can't we? Pompous and didactic, as I said before, but we can also be passionate propagandists. I'm sort of one, yes? We can also be passionate fighters for social justice causes because we have an acute sense of what's right and what's wrong. We often see ourselves as sort of a white knight, right? Riding in to save the day. Here I come to save the day, right? But usually we're just like Don Quixote attacking a windmill, you know? And we're totally convinced that this is the right thing to do. We do also stick up for our friends, and we like to stand up to bullies. Not because we're especially brave, we can be, but because our moral outrage is inconsolable. You see, we get very worked up about what is fair. We're zealots, yes, for good or for ill. We can champion great causes or not so great ones. We have the best intention while we pave the road to hell, right? A big lesson for us is to accept that there are other points of view and that everyone is on their own journey to find themselves and find what's real. We need to leave people free to make their own mistakes and decisions and to not impose our will on people unless they ask us to. If it's consensual and they like that sort of thing, then I'm more than happy to oblige. Anyway. If they ask me to, then it's their fault. So. Now, some celebrity examples of this are, besides me, I just like to blow up my own head, you know. One of my fans got a tattoo, this tattoo of mine, the Jupiter one. Someone got the same one, and I was like, oh my God, and my head blew up, you know what I mean? They're like, look, Saturn girl, I got you a tattoo. Anyway, so enough about that. But some celebrities, one I noticed was LL Cool J. Ladies love Cool James. Remember him from the 90s? I thought of him because he had that military character in the movie Toys, right? Oops, there's a thing on my camera. Remember that movie Toys? With Robin Williams and LL Cool J and what's her name? Joan Cusack. Right? And his character in the movie is like, really sort of rigid. But then he himself in his private life was a very political person. He advocated for various causes and politicians and could be quite preachy. Well, we also have Peter Falk, who you probably don't remember, unless you're my age or a little bit older. But he played Columbo on the series of the same name. He was a relentless investigator, right? And one of the facets or features of Mars opposite Jupiter is we don't know when to quit. to our own detriment. We just keep pressing, don't we? And then Joey Lauren Adams, who again, you probably don't remember, but she was in a lot of the Kevin Smith movies, like Chasing Amy and Mallrats. And remember, her character in Chasing Amy was very independent, aggressive, and passionate about her life philosophy, right? We also have Anna Kendrick, who I love. Remember in Wedding Crashers, she's like, don't go, 'cause I'll find you. It's very Mars opposite Jupiter. And she's also very passionate and creative. She's a dancer, a singer, and she just has that martial presence. And the like reddish hair, you know. So, and then we have Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson. Remember him from the movie Taken? He also says, I'll find you. You know, I'll find you and I'll you. Right? I have a bad Irish accent, you know. Don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. But who I am is a man of very specialized skills. I can't do it. I sound awful. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. The other thing about Liam Neeson, I like to say Liam Neeson, like Key and Peele, right? Apparently one of his friends back in Ireland was assaulted, or I don't know, maybe he was in New York. I don't know where the heck he was. But I saw a video of him talking about one of his friends being assaulted, and he ended up spending the whole night like frantically looking for this person. And that's a very Mars opposite Jupiter thing. He didn't know when to quit, did he? And then there's Tim Roth, who you may or may not know. He's an English actor. Remember from Pulp Fiction? He's the one in the beginning of the movie in the diner with Honey Bunny. And he convinces her that it's the right thing to do to rob the diner, right? That's the Jupiter BS. Well, anyway, we also have Joe Pesci, who's sort of like, I mean, he can be a pain in the butt, but I love his energy and his character. Have you seen any of his movies? Do you remember Goodfellas, right? Goodfellas? He's like, what do you mean I'm funny? Think I'm funny? What am I? Do I amuse you? Am I a clown here for your entertainment? Right? Or, you know, what's the other one? The other big one, Casino, right? And he takes a pen and he does very naughty things with that pen, right? That's another Mars, Jupiter type thing. That temper, right? I identify with his attitude quite a bit, you know? He's sort of like, I hate using that term spirit animal, but you know what I mean. I identify with his attitude. Well, what sort of events do we see correlate with this transit? Well, I looked back in time to see a couple of them. And what's interesting, right? Jupiter's retrograde right now. The last time we had it was late July, early August of 2021. And Jupiter was also retrograde. And remember, Jupiter will necessarily be retrograde within a certain amount of degrees from the sun, typically within a trine. Or between trines and trines, right? From the sun. But I do that in a whole nother video. So this transit perfected, right, in 2021 during the Summer Olympics in Japan. And athleticism and competition are very, very representative of this transit. So I thought that was an interesting backdrop, right? We also see events to do with illness because Mars represents illness, right? So, right as this perfected, Florida had the greatest amount of COVID cases in a single day since the start of the pandemic. And this was about 21,683, almost 21,700 cases. So, and then also around the same time, the COVID cases for the whole United States doubled over 10 days, while the Delta variant spread like wildfire, right? Also around the same time, like we keep zooming out, right? We started with Florida, then the US, and now the world, right? The COVID cases worldwide exceeded 200 million. 200 million. And that's according to Johns Hopkins University. And then a death toll of 4.2 million. I mean, that's wild, right? Breaking records, that's what Jupiter does. What other broken records did we see? Well, I mean, smash. I mean, I don't mean like vinyl. Although you can break your vinyl if you want, but I don't condone breaking vinyl. Unless by some chance you have a vinyl record of Nickelback. But why would they ever have vinyl? If they actually have vinyl records, I'm going to start protesting. Anyway, I know some of you probably like them. Just can't stand them. So one of the broken records here in 2021 was Amazon becoming the second biggest employer in the United States. That means 1 out of every 169 Americans was employed by Amazon. I'm sure it's more now. And number one was Walmart, who employs about 1% of the American population. That's about the same amount of Americans who are in prison. So, I wonder if there's a little correlation there. Anyway. And then California had a record-breaking wildfire. It was the biggest one up to that point, known as the Dixie Fire. And it burned over 320,000 acres. My God. I'm from California, and wildfires were terrible. And now I'm in Colorado, where we also have wildfires. So, marshal me, with my Mars. I just can't get away from the fire. We didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world was turning. Anyway. So the time before that transit in 2021 was May of 2019. And again, it was retrograde. So, and this is when the UN, these are more records that were broken, by the way. The UN announced that 1 million plant and animal species are at risk of extinction. Well, we also had the event when Iran announced that it was backing out of the nuclear deal. Right? After Trump dumped it. I mean, what's the point for them if the United States wasn't going to, hold up its side of the bargain? And then, in climate change news, carbon dioxide reached its highest levels in Earth's atmosphere in the past 3 million years. 3 million years. No one's going to get Austin Powers jokes. Why would they? And this was increasing the global fears of climate change effects. And of course, what did we see since then? An increase in storms, an increase in fires. Oh. But these events, I thought, were the most interesting because they are sort of indicative of what's going on right now. And I'm talking about clashes that happened between Gaza and Israel back in May of 2019, as this aspect was perfecting, right? So, a couple days before, 2 Israeli soldiers were wounded by a Gazan sniper during regular Palestinian protests. See, every so often, the Palestinians would protest their situation. I've done a whole video that outlines a lot of this history. That would be the Pluto going direct video, I believe. So go check that out. Go check it out. But you'll notice that I have Israeli and Palestinian flags on the what's it called? Thumbnail. My thumbnail. I have such bad ADHD. It's terrible. So in response to this sniping, and remember, these soldiers were wounded, right? In response, Israel carried out airstrikes, killing 2 people. Then Hamas, in another response, launched rockets into Israel. And that seriously injured 1 person. Then Israel responded again by hitting 120, and this is the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, hit 120 sites in Gaza, right, as retaliation, killing 4 people, including a pregnant woman and her toddler. Or rather, sorry, she wasn't pregnant, she had a toddler, a woman and her toddler. And then Gaza responded once again with 200 rockets, killing 4 Israelis. And then Israel once again responded with its Air Force striking 210 sites in Gaza, killing 3 people, and this time including a 33-year-old pregnant woman. So I'm mentioning this because of how the Israel-Gaza conflict is currently exploding. while Mars is perfecting his opposition to Jupiter. Daddy Jupiter. So what sort of events can we expect this time around? Like I said, he's retrograde, so he's not going to be doing very nice things. We will likely see similar events to the ones I just talked about. Explosions and violence, right? Especially with the war in Gaza. But we could see political violence here, especially as divides sharpen, right? Political divides, not just in the United States, but worldwide. However, in the United States, both of the major political parties are sort of having internal conflicts. The Republican Party's having a big split over electing a new Speaker of the House, right? And far-right Speaker Kevin McCarthy was removed during a party mutiny, and now they're trying to look for even further right people to shove in there, I'm sure. Anyway, it's been a complete disaster. And then the Democratic Party is having internal conflict over the conflict between Israel and Gaza. A State Department official resigned over this. Members of the squad, right, those are the progressive Democrats, members of the squad like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib called out the blind rhetoric by Katie Porter and John Fetterman. Well, we could also see explosions in illness cases coming up. It's getting colder, right? And it's getting to be cold and flu season. Also, interestingly enough, COVID cases seem to increase around the same time. And if you're worried in general, wear a mask. But what does this mean for you specifically, right? Well, you see, this is the final eclipse of this particular cycle, right? Taking place in Taurus and Scorpio. And it represents a big ending for us, doesn't it? We can see how this lunar eclipse, we can see this lunar eclipse as marking the close of a phase of our lives. However, the fact that it is conjunct Mars opposing Jupiter indicates that this will be a difficult one. We may see a dramatic close to this phase over the next 6 months or so. But what was this phase for you? Well, the 2022 eclipses bounced back and forth between Taurus and Scorpio, right? We've talked about this before. And at the end of April last year, we had a solar eclipse in Taurus. At the end of October last year, we had another one in Scorpio, right? The whole sign houses that Taurus and Scorpio represent for you will tell us something about the areas of life that were undergoing significant changes, right? This is determined by your rising sign. Since eclipses oscillate between two signs, right, we can look at what eclipse phase you all were in by seeing what your rising sign is. And we're going to look at this by opposing rising signs, right? Because these bounce between two signs, as I said. So it'll be the sort of same phase. Or two signs at once, right? I'll tell you what I do. Two signs at the same time. That's what I'd do with $1 million. You know what I'd do? I'd do two signs at the same time. Anyway. That was from Office Space. I'm horrible. Like I said, ADHD. So let's start off here with Aries and Libra, because this is the 2nd and 8th houses, right? This is money and death. So this is the phase of the eclipse cycle, the closing phase of the eclipse cycle, where we reap the rewards and consequences of our previous actions. We often see a focus on our material well-being, but it's also a time of death and loss. During this phase, we are learning to let go. Let it go. Let it go. Can't turn me back anymore. I don't remember the lyrics. Turn away and shut the door. I don't care what you're going to say. Let the storm rage on. I'm out of key, obviously. So anyway, The lunar eclipse, though, could bring about an unexpected or significant loss, most likely financial. You see, but this is more likely if you've been irresponsible with your resources over the past year or so. If you were responsible, you could actually see a gain, right? An investment, or maybe even a savings, or perhaps escape a loss, right? That's another thing that we see. So it's also time to finally let go of crystallized conditions and beliefs that have perhaps been holding you back. And I'm talking about yourself, right? We start to see that we're not the same person that we were at the beginning of this cycle. And this presents us with new challenges and a new cycle, right? And for an indication of that, let's look at Taurus and Scorpio risings, right? So for this phase, right, the 2022, the Scorpio Taurus phase, this would have been your 1st and 7th houses, which represent self and others, right? You see, this is the beginning of the eclipse cycle. It's where we typically find a crisis around how we relate to others and ourselves. These necessarily influence each other, don't they? We may have big breakups, or we may meet new people. And what do relationships do? Well, they often precipitate a conflict around confidence, self-esteem, and identity. You see? When we identify with our relationships, we lose ourselves. We collapse into the relationship. We often find that we have an existential crisis and that we need to focus on ourselves more. We start to ask questions like, what does this all mean? What kind of person do I want to be? We start to develop a vision of ourselves and where we want to go. This eclipse, though, could bring about splits and breakups, especially if you've let yourself get swallowed up into a codependent situation, because this phase is supposed to be about cultivating independence, right? It could also mean that you're starting to demonstrate this independence that you have been cultivating, right? If you've been putting effort into things. And in this case, it could feel like your resolve is being tested. So hold to your boundaries, because this phase is all about discovering boundaries. Well, and then what happens? Well, let's look at Gemini and Sag rising, right? And for Gemini and Sag rising, this was the 12th and 6th houses. And I call this the cocoon phase. You see, these houses are tough. It's like isolation and then having to take responsibility for things. This happens, of course, after the 1st and 7th house phase, right? After the existential crises. And during this, we often want to be alone to process these dramatic experiences, don't we? It's time to lick our wounds, right? To pick up the pieces and start putting them into place to fulfill the vision of ourselves that we developed in the last phase. Excuse me. Hopefully we see that we've put some structure and some stability in place while we've taken some time alone. This eclipse, though, will probably bring people and events into your life that challenge you. Your ability to be stable will be tested, right? Stable and responsible. You will likely find that you can't tolerate being isolated anymore either. You'll want to get out. You start feeling like, I've got to break out, right? Smashing Pumpkins, let me out. Let me out. Sorry. Billy Corgan. I still do. I used to love Smashing Pumpkins. I still do, but I used to also. Now, events that challenge you. You may see that you're ready to show your vision of yourself to the world. Just watch out, because it could be quite amplified with Mars and Jupiter. So watch out for going overboard with your enthusiasm. You don't want to be like Dr. Phil telling people how they should live. Well, let me tell you there. I want you to start living as... I want you to take responsibility for yourself. Anyway. Now, how about Cancer and Capricorn? This is the next phase. The 11th and 5th houses, which are hopes and pleasure, right? Hopes and enjoyment. These are the good houses, whereas the last ones were the bad houses, right? So now I call this the light of day phase, where we emerge from the cocoon as a little social butterfly once again. During this phase, we have to learn to connect with people. We have to learn how to have fun again. We may have had children, gotten pregnant, or seen some other developments with our kids. Of course, not everyone has children, even though it's the best thing in the world, right? As a parent, I have to say that. But it really is. I mean, I can't imagine life without, my child. My everything in the world. Anyway, now it's also about being hopeful again and thinking about the path that we've chosen and the one that we want to take. We find that we often linger in the hopes, though, and the dreams rather than making them happen. So, now, this eclipse, though, should bring an end to a lot of that. You could find that you procrastinated quite a bit, and now you have a need for action. Maybe you planned a vacation or a fun event that was canceled. Something interfered, probably. You could just be feeling the urge to get back to work and make your hopes and dreams a reality. And that leads us to the next set of rising signs, Leo and Aquarius. This is me and some of my peeps. I've been with lots of Leo risings as an Aquarius rising because Leo's my 7th house. Now these are the 10th and 4th houses, aren't they? Where you're going and where you come from. Right? The 10th house is like life direction, and the 4th house is like your origins, right? So this is the action phase, right? I consider this the full moon glory, making things happen, having to prove something, right? This is where we actually have to make effort in order to manifest things. You probably had big changes in your work and home situation. I know I did, right? We quit jobs, we get promotions, we change our life direction. We get discontented with the way things have always been. This also brings big changes within us, doesn't it? Sometimes we literally move or find a new place. We're also prompted to find home in ourselves, psychologically, right? To put this sense of stability and security into place in order to achieve our goals. The 4th house supports the 10th house, doesn't it? Oh. This eclipse, though, could bring hidden things to the surface about your family history, generational wealth, and resources. Because that's the 4th house, you see. But really, it's about the stability and action. And this could be when you actually change jobs or move. You could end up, you're trying to tie up loose ends that still bound you or bind you to confining circumstances or intolerable ones. Pardon me. So this is your signal that it's a safe time to move on and to start to be reflective. How did you do? And that takes us to Virgo and Pisces rising. And this is the 9th and 3rd houses, which are like learning, practice, beliefs, and values. This is what I call the reflective phase. It reminds me of the disseminating moon, where we demonstrate that we've learned something and hopefully are a little wiser, right? We are challenged on what we believe and how we communicate it and why. We find that old ways of looking at the world no longer suit us. And we start to consider, what the meaning of it all is. What did we achieve? What was our intention? Where could I have put in more effort and intensity? Where do we go from here? Which is the way that's clear? Still looking for my blue jean baby queen. That's from Essex. That's like 70s stuff. Smashing Pumpkins covered that song. It's called Rock On. Good song. Gonna rock on. Rock on. Anyway. You see, this eclipse then is about putting a nail in the coffin of your old misconceptions. You were wrong about some things, weren't you? I know I was. What were they? What were the consequences of my actions? You'll likely have some big conflicts. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I totally lost my train of thought. You'll totally have some big conflicts around legacy ideologies, things that you've believed for a long time or that followed you around from your parents or family. You see, the lesson here is to start to understand death. I don't just mean physical or material death. Remember, St. Paul in his epistles said, I die daily. He didn't mean physically or literally. He meant he died to how he was the day before. He was entering into a new understanding, right? So when I say we start to understand death, it's that we start to move into new conditions. We start to see the material consequences of our right and wrong actions. You begin to enter into this phase of discontent, right? Which will eventually be the 2nd and 8th house phase. And this is how we make progress and develop. Because in order to make progress and develop, we have to let go of previously restraining conditions, things that hold us back. And if we don't progress, if we're just content to stay where we are, we won't even get to stay still. We'll start moving backwards. We'll start making regress instead of progress. So remember that life requires effort. It requires self-discipline. And if you're on a spiritual path, it really is our obligation to start to see these blind spots in ourselves and make the unconscious conscious. Anyway, thank you for watching till the end. I really hope that was useful. Remember to like and subscribe, comment, and click the bell and select all to get notified. Check out my other videos because they're the best. I have tons of educational content and I'm sort of cute and funny, So there's that. And I do the best readings. It's science. See my contact info below or visit me at frankielynch.com for more information. Please support my work with super chats, and super thanks. And also on Patreon, right? My information is below once again, so I can produce more content. But most importantly, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a spectacular whatever it is you're having.